Anyone who's watched a Gen Zer overshare their private life on social media has breathed a sigh of relief that they were never compelled to display the inner workings of their unformed minds on permanent record on the internet. Every half-formed brain burp, every painful breakup, every Nazi Halloween costume, these private shames were public property only when the protagonist was famous and relatively young. Famous, young, or a newspaper columnist, for isn't the bold Boris Johnson experiencing the roosting of his opinionated chickens? The Prime Minister once used his newspaper columns for bearing his innermost thoughts, in the same way an arsey teenager might tweet that their least favorite teacher is boring without considering this might come back to haunt them. This isn't quite Dear Diary, it's more Pride and Prejudice. How has Boris shamed himself? Let us count the ways. Jo Swinson, in her headgirlish way, is desperate to dob in her competition and so has pointed to Mr. Johnson's comments about comparing elite women athletes to wet otters. It's all right, Jo. All the other pupils know what Boris is like without any grassing. Concentrate on yourself, it's exam time. An unearthed column from 1999 details the former Foreign Secretary writing that young people had an almost Nigerian interest in money and gadgets. You may say he's pushing racial stereotypes. Johnson probably thought he was showing a worldly knowledge. He also, it recently emerged, wrote a piece for The Guardian in 2000 detailing how alarm bells went off in his head when he saw a bunch of black kids on the street to add to his comments about pickaninnies and watermelon smiles. Onwards, and yet another archived Spectator column details Mr. Johnson's thoughts on single mothers, this one from 1995. And such thoughts they are. A fecund glut of single mothers is producing a generation of ill-raised, ignorant, aggressive and illegitimate children, he wrote. The blame was laid at the feet of men. Quite right. Well, there are caveats. There was, Mr. Johnson said, £90 billion being spent on welfare. It was generally plausible that if having a baby out of wedlock meant destitution on a Victorian scale, young girls might indeed think twice about having a baby. But, while he concedes most young girls don't procreate because they are looking for an easy state handout, he goes on to insult them further. They have children, he writes, to distract them from their monotonous and depressing lives. Having a little creature to love is a balm from the turmoil of their lives. Is creature supposed to be affectionate? Let us not dwell. Men are to blame for women becoming wed to the state because the marriageable pool is so feeble. The modern British man has a reluctance or inability to take control of his woman and be head of a household. For more on this story, visit the news article link.